Hello, everyone. My name is Wanapheya Tolman. I go by Peya. My name causes them to stampede. I am part of the Hunkpapa Lakota Isanti Dakota, and I am here part of the Kekto podcast with these two fine gentlemen.
My name is Corice Lieb. I am part of the Umaha Nation. I am also here part of the Kekto program podcast. I am going to UNO as an emergency management major and tribal management major and drone minor.
Hello, everyone. And today we're going to be talking about Native Americans and how over time we have accumulated different problems in our societies due to colonization and how they've been forced upon us over time and how we can now deal with them and move towards a brighter future. But for now, it's really important to understand why we are currently where we are. And today's podcast will be a conversation about that.
Colonization began its process as soon as Christopher Columbus first took steps on now modern North America. He began the process of colonization, which led to the discovery of new land, new resources, basically a whole new world for the European world. And they slowly begin their process arriving to this new discovered world. And their colonization process affected thousands of tribes, millions of people that had already occupied the land beforehand. And colonization basically took away resources, land. It began a heavy process of the destruction of cultures, language.
Just basically taking away our way of life, where we would reside and basically hunt, live, provide for our families and people. It was just taken due to colonization, and whole tribes were completely wiped out, gone extinct, put in museums. And you can go on and on about the brief history of what happened during that time, and it's just basically genocide, cultural genocide, taking away people's language, lifestyle, and just trying to wipe out an entire race at that point due to Christian and religious beliefs.
I would like to also add that the reason why all three of us speak English right now is a consequence of colonization.
Yeah, and only a handful of tribal members are even able to speak our language now fluently, and there's not much you can really do to revitalize the language when it wasn't written. It's very hard to do, and we're still struggling to do things about that now.
I think it's important also to talk a little bit more about what you mentioned, which is that many tribes actually did not write down a language. So I think it's really important to understand kind of why we did that.
Many tribes didn't use a written language of sorts. Many tribes used pictographs, small drawings that describe an event of some sorts. Many tribes also have used a winter count, which is a giant roll of animal skin, could be buffalo, deer, elk, but laid out, and it's written in a circular, almost like a spiral of pictographs that depict the event per year. And my family, several generations back, are people. We come from people who were winter count keepers, knowledge keepers, and they were ones that kept the knowledge of the tribe's history through these winter counts, and they showed the event, and they knew the history behind that pictograph, the story. They would share that, and they would make sure that that knowledge of that individual year was kept, so many could learn from it as a sort of a lesson to future generations. And it was just because a way many tribes worked was because we used oral learning. We didn't need to use writing as a method of teaching. That the way of speaking words and passing down knowledge was acceptable. And that is how we kept our history and our knowledge of many things, even to this day. That many things have still stayed with us even through these last several centuries. And it all came from that way, speaking from generation to generation, passing that knowledge and that history then down to the next generation, especially with the last couple of 100 years has been most important due to a lot of history for many tribes is forever gone. But many tribes had managed to persevere and stick with their history and their culture and their knowledge of their language. And that all came from by passing down knowledge from the mouth, not written down.
Yeah, I think that was a great summary, Paya. Thank you so much. I think another important thing to mention is that Native Americans, pretty much all tribes universally, did not believe in owning any land. I think that's something really important for people to understand, because when colonization first started, they did not understand the concept of owning land. It was simply you existed on the land, you caretaked the land. It was very backwards when colonization started and they believed you could own a land. We thought it was ridiculous. It was like owning your mother, owning your father. It was very strange and alien concept to us. And I just think it's really important for people to understand how different our way of thinking was compared to when the colonization started. It was almost a complete reversal. We saw ourselves as caretakers of the land, protectors of all life, and they came and saw life as a resource and the land as a resource. So it was a complete 180 from anything that we were thinking and they were thinking.
So they saw the natives as only inhabitants of the land, not owners. So they said they could only reside and not have complete ownership of that area. And that basically pushed them out as soon as the colonizers came and tried to assimilate into our society and just basically pushed around the natives, putting these concepts and constructs in places. Yeah, just forced them out that way, saying, hey, yeah, we got this deed. You can't be here anymore, basically. So they saw us as savages that had no souls because we didn't have a religious belief, but our belief was tending to the land and respecting it and not taking more than what we needed and not what we wanted by giving back in return.
That's really great, Corice. I really agree with that. I think that's also really important is our religion, for the most part, was caretaking the land, was protecting life. We were intertwined in nature itself. We saw ourselves as to help nature to be healthy, and we didn't see nature as a resource, which again is completely different from what the Western construct was at the time and even today is. It's just completely different.
Yeah, we just had two different aspects of life. Back then, people didn't see eye, and now.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention briefly is that there is this idea that Native Americans did not have the horse. Over, the past several decades, it's been becoming more apparent and people have been starting to ask more questions. Is it really true that the horse was not in the Americas? And if so, how long were they in the Americas for? So science currently says that the horse was in the Americas originally. The horse originated from America and then expanded to the rest of the world. Now, why I'm bringing this up and why it's so important is because at the time of colonization, the horse was a symbol of civilization. So in Spain, for example, if the Native Americans were shown to have mastered the horse, as they would call it, that would have meant that they were actually capable of more legal rights at the time and could not be treated as simply savages, because to have mastered the horse means to have mastered civilization at the time. And the fact that if they would have actually said the Native Americans had horses, it would have arguably completely shifted the way colonization came about. But because the horse was said to have not originated or at least not be in America at the time, colonization then took a completely different turn than it could have. And the Lakota and Omaha and Nakota are peoples of the horse and have had the horse for a very long time. So to say that we haven't had the horse is outrageous for them to be able to say that, because the horse has been a part of us for so long, and it's a part of our family. And it kind of, mentioning this kind of goes into the whole boarding school cultural assimilation and separation of families that we'll be discussing next. Because to separate the horse from us is taking a part of our family and a part of our heritage away. The horse was the horse nation to us. It was an equal, if not arguably more. So I think that is another really important thing to mention. And I think it helps us to move into the next part really nicely. So next we'll be discussing boarding schools, cultural assimilation, and separation of families.
So I've looked and have family members that have been affected due to boarding schools that still feel the pain of going through what that did to them even now, and refuse to talk about it. My uncle has been asked to do interviews on it about how his grandpa went through and what he had to go through and whatnot. He shares the history of what happened with him, but what he personally went through, he doesn't really share. So basically with what happened with our grandpa is that he went through boarding school, assimilated into what you'd be now calling civilization and modernization today, and learned how to plow, learned how to farm and tillage to land, do what the Westerners do, provide for their families, build a house, indoctrinate into what is called society. And the banking system basically came in and, due to taxation, foreclosed on his house and took his house and basically put land in trust, and the trust ran out without the knowledge of the tribe. And they foreclosed on the house without telling them that you need to pay those state taxes. Otherwise, your house is going to be foreclosed and sold in the bank area. And due to that, he and his family had to rely on going back to boarding schools to send their children to those boarding schools because they had no house, because it was taken from them. You can even look into all this. It was the Harlan case, Joseph Harlan. And him and a lot of other tribal members actually had to go and talk to the state legislation during the time, the Indian Bureau affair, and ask, like, what are you going to do about the fact that you have now taken more land, but you've decided to reintroduce the trust doctrine and put the land back in trust? But what about the fact that these houses were already bought and taken? Do you plan on giving that back? And the response to that was, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to that question. It's a good question. And nothing was ever done or overturned to return that land back to those family members. So ultimately, they had to rely on returning back to the boarding schools just to have a roof under their head. And basically, the purpose of these schools was to teach the tribal members and the children a trade to basically assimilate into normal, was considered normal for people to do, which was tillage, plow, do something with your hands, which is just working. And that's what the majority of what they learned was, tending to like barns or working the fields, which doesn't really do much or equate to many jobs, to be honest. And that was mostly their experience. And if you can share any more on your side.
Yeah, a lot of what Corice said is true. Their boarding schools basically to simulate. I cannot remember who said it, but it's considered a pretty famous quote: "To kill the Indian, save the man." And the thought of that we were so uncivilized that boarding schools could be used as a method to kill the savagery within us, as they put it, and they could save the human, because we weren't considered human. Even to this day, the doctrine of discovery still categorizes Native Americans as non-human, savage freaks, basically. And boarding schools, it took away everything. It took away your culture, it took away your language. Children as young as kindergartners, like 5, 6 years old, even down, they were beaten, horrible things done to them just because they couldn't speak English. They spoke their traditional languages. And because of that, they were beaten down and had horrible things done to them because they spoke their language or they practiced their cultures, that made them uncivilized within the boarding school system, within their eyes. And a lot of these boarding schools used Christianity as a backer, a justification basically for their actions. Almost just about every single boarding school in North America is ran by like Christian groups, like the Catholics. Catholics are more predominantly known for the boarding schools in North America, but they use Christianity, the way of God, as a justification for many of their actions. And even to this day, that many governments still don't acknowledge the history that they funded these, and they allowed these monstrosities to live amongst these boarding schools. And consequences, there's records, hundreds of children that went to those boarding schools and never went home or never made it back home ever again. To this day, that there's so many bodies of children being found in these boarding schools. And it's a question I've heard before, and it's, would you send your kids to a school that had a graveyard next to it specifically for them? And most people, I think, would say no, because that's wrong. These boarding schools, there's so much bodies that they left behind and pretend that never happened. In Canada, there's hundreds of bodies being found of Native children found in mass graveyards in these churches or where these boarding schools used to lay. And this summer, I believe in Arkansas, that a boarding school that used to lay there was discovered to have over 80 children, over 80 Native children in their graveyards. But the boarding school system was basically to kill what the colonizers considered uncivilized, savage, and it was to wipe us out, and thinking they could assimilate us to what they wanted to have in their image. The three of us talking right now, talking about this history, goes to show that their project, their mission to wipe out Native people, Native culture, Native language failed. That the three of us speaking about that history and knowing the history goes to show that they failed in what they were doing, and just goes to show that how resilient Native people are, especially in the face of colonization, and still strive to fight to this day.
Very well said. Thank you. I think that was a really great summary of boarding schools and how they attempted to use it as a form of cultural assimilation. And I want to just briefly mention why they used this approach specifically, as opposed to just killing us in warfare, because wouldn't that be easier, you would think? So the reason that they didn't just kill us all in open warfare, they did that for a lot of different Native tribes, but the Plains Indians, for the most part, were the ones that were the hardest to beat in battle, because we were, as I mentioned earlier, peoples of the horse, and we were incredibly skilled on horseback. We were some of the best warriors on horseback that the Army has ever seen in America, and they literally couldn't beat us fairly on even ground. So that is why they kind of took this more assimilation boarding school approach for us, at least for us specifically, it was because they couldn't beat us in combat. And every time they tried to have a treaty with us, and then the colonizers would then come and break those treaties. And this is something really important to mention too. When they say treaty, they would then go and break that treaty. So there's been multiple treaties broken for all different kinds of tribes. And
treaties not being honored at all.
Exactly. It's super important for people to understand, and for you to understand this, so you're listening, that we tried the legal route. We really tried again and again and again. But every single time we think we would make headway in the legal world, they would then just go and blatantly ignore that. So, and then we would then have to go and fight them again. And then we'd beat them again. So then they said, okay, we can't obviously keep having these treaties, breaking them, and then these people come and beat us because this is ridiculous. So they then turn to the boarding school. They're saying, okay, fine. If we can't beat them on fair ground, we're then going to separate these families. We're going to take their children away, and we're going to basically hold their children hostage. So that way we can then do whatever we want to the land, and we can take the land finally. That's what this was really about. This was all about getting the resources, taking away the land. And these boarding schools were simply one of the latest tactics in order to take this land.
We were the ones that tried working towards peace. A lot of the tribes didn't even want to fight because every one of us dead is a close relative, somebody that we grew up with, that we have close relations with. And there was a lot more of them than there was of us in some cases when it had to do with smaller tribes. And a lot of the other smaller tribes didn't have as many warriors or fighters. So a lot of other tribes couldn't afford to fight either when it came to when they started to populate a lot more, when the Westerners started to expand, other countries were coming. A lot of the people sued for peace, but a lot of people from the other side didn't see us as civilized, so they treated us as subhumans, as people that didn't have souls, that were basically the bottom of the barrel of society at that point. And a lot of people don't even realize that a lot of tribal members weren't even considered civilians and weren't allowed to vote or have a say in the matter in certain aspects of politics. So it's not new that this stuff has been happening. It's been going on for hundreds of years at this point.
It wasn't until, I believe, after World War I did Native people actually get U.S. citizenship until after World War I. We were one of the last few people of the U.S. to be granted U.S. citizenship. But also that, in a way, that boarding schools were used as a way to demoralize and break down the fighting spirit of many tribes by you go for the children. It was a tactic that they used, and they used very aggressively against many tribes. They went for the children, and it was just basically to demoralize the fighting spirit that many tribes have. And that's what I was going to.
I can't even imagine having citizenship over a land that you were living in your whole entire life. That's just terrible.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's really crazy to see that this was happening so recently. I believe the last boarding school was shut down in the 1970s that was operating like this as a means to destroy the culture of Native American groups. Yeah, 1970s was when when they shut down the last one. So it's not like this is an ancient thing that happened, so long ago. This is something that's been happening very recently. There are many of our elders around that were in these boarding schools and have experienced the effects of these boarding schools and how it has affected then multiple generations of families. And this leads us very nicely into the next topic, which is intergenerational trauma effects and how they have led to broken home life for Native American youth.
Yeah, this generational trauma thing has taken a huge toll on the Native community in a whole. It's caused families to be separated, rely on drug abuse, be put in foster care systems that are ineffective, that lead to more neglect, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And majority of the kids run away. They don't want to be separated or taken away from their family. So thank God for the ICWA for trying to keep tribal families together. And even recently, they tried taking that away to add to even more trauma that has been causing just holes within our families. Many families get separated due to the prison system as well. A lot of families resort to alcohol, which leads to abusive families. The Relocation Act contributed to that, trying to put families into these cities where majority of what they faced were alcohol, gang violence, and drug abuse. So that just contributed to the problem, to what we still see too in today's family foster care system. My brother is a prime example of that. He abused drugs, lost his mind, and became part of that healthcare system where they try to help the homeless with mental health disorders. And it's just an uphill battle. There's no in between when it comes to that. When people go down that route and resort to substance abuse to block out the trauma that they had to deal with when they were younger, they resort to alcohol. They develop even worse habits such as violent tendencies. They aren't the same person when they become like that. My dad is also another one as well. From being introduced to the gang violence, alcohol, he would rob liquor stores and run out with a 30 pack. He said, he told me when I was a kid, it was called a beer run. He would take the beer and with his friend and run out without paying. So that's kind of the generational trauma that I had to deal with, was going through foster care system within the state. There's times where my family were almost separated, put into other different group homes when we were actually. My sisters were taken and put into a different foster home for girls, and then me and my brothers were put into a different one for boys, and we had to stay there for about a month or two to ultimately be put back into the same foster home because of a tribal member that was doing foster care at the time, who was Larry Hinman. He was the tribal member that had the foster care home for us. That basically allowed us to stay together because of the ICWA case being enacted, allowing to keep tribal families together without separating them and keeping them within their culture and educating them on it. And that was what ultimately allowed us to stay together at the time. But even then, just growing up in the foster care system, multiple times my brothers, they tried to run away. It's just a broken system. Majority of my older siblings have been put into multiple different group homes and foster homes, way more than I have. The total that I've been through was 15 group homes, and my older brother was through at least 25, I believe, if not more. So that was basically the generational trauma system that was put in place due to assimilation and relocation acts to basically get people to modernize in what society is today, which is riddled with drugs and gang violence and homelessness now because of those.
What Corice said is very true. Generational trauma that comes from boarding schools leads to unhealthy methods to cope with that trauma. That gets passed on with abuse, alcohol, and drugs. And it's passed on to the next generation. That's passed on. And from personal experience, I have family that are like that. With family that suffer from that generational trauma that comes passed on from boarding schools for quite some time now. And it's just very true what he said. It's very damaging to communities and to families on the reservation and for tribal members across North America.
I'd just like to thank you, Corice, for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. And I think it's also important to mention that the reason that it's so important to understand why Native American youth are in these systems where, like Corice said, he had to move 15 times in the foster care system and his brother 25 times. That's absolutely crazy, because as a child, having a stable home is so important to your development and growth. And Native American youth that are in this foster care system are not allowed that actual right to feel that they're safe, to feel like they have a place that they can call home. And by putting them in so many different homes and with so many different people, you actually eliminate that sense of an anchor. That anchor, whether it's in your culture or in your home or with even a specific person, you've eliminated that completely. And by doing that, you further damage these people, these youth, and created a world where they feel like they don't understand who they are. They don't understand their culture. And Corice is an amazing example because he is working hard to learn his cultural ways, to understand where he came from. He's putting in the work to understand who he is. And that is incredibly admirable, because the system tried to break him and it didn't, because he's still here and he still wants to learn about his culture, arguably more than if he would have had it his entire life, because he wants to know who he is. He wants to learn these ways because he understands its importance, and he wants to know who he is, and he is going to figure it out because he is dedicated and he knows that this is who he wants to be. And I just think that's incredibly important to mention.
Thank you, Colin. So I'm not even supposed to even be here right now. Statistically, most of the people that have my background and even Pea's background, that any of our backgrounds that remotely have to resort or relate back to the system, we're supposed to be like drug dealers and gangbangers and wind up in jail, not even go to school or college. And that's the worst part about it, is putting somebody as a statistic rather than relating to them as a person and saying you're going to go down that path regardless.
Yeah, it's quite a crazy world we live in. That's for sure. But
based beyond the statistics, and I've gone to college, I'm going to college now.
Yeah. See, that's again super important, which is that there's so many Native youth out there that they've created youth because that we've had to go through so many things, because we had to go through all the separation. In fact, Native American youth now, there's some that are so strong and resilient that it doesn't matter what you do to them. They're still going to succeed. Take Corice, for example. He's going to college. He was in the military. He's starting a family now. I mean, he is proof. And also, Peya is proof as well that no matter what happens to you, you're still going to fight, because it's who you are and it's in your blood. And you know what the system is doing to you right now is not right. But you're going to make it right, because it's simply who you are as a person and your identity. So I really admire so many Native American youth all over, because we are resilient. We really are. And this leads us very nicely into our next topic, which is what we are currently doing to help undo these negative problems and work towards a solution.
Right now, we're working to try and develop drone programs on reservations to help with emergency management and response protocols with the use of drones. And basically what we want to do is train tribal member personnel and even the workforce on there, like police, land management. We want to try and train them on utilizing these drones for surveillance, helping with search and rescue, patrolling, whatever, looking after bison or horses, whichever one you could think of using the drones for is what we want to do. And we want to provide the material, the training, assist in any means necessary, get app programs, buy them for you, or guide you in the right direction to help you get your drone license, to learn about the technology and how you can utilize it that better help you in the daily needs that you need to do for your job. Because a lot of them are used, like the technology for these drones are endless. People are using them for GIS mapping. They're using robo-dogs. Who thought we'd have robo-dogs by now to disarm bombs or go into hazardous areas that in the work environment the natural human can't venture, such as hot working power plants or radioactive areas, stuff like that, to use these drones to do things that people can't do in certain areas. And they're using them to connect Wi-Fi cellular communications now by keeping these drones tethered up into an area for months at a time with a generator, external generator, and just coming down for peller maintenance. And that it's endless. And they're utilizing AI technology to try and compile and compile data a lot easier than it would take to write it down on a piece of paper or keep it in a notebook or type it up in an essay. It's going to make things a whole lot easier. Bank systems are trying to use it to keep records of finances a lot easier rather than punching and crunching calculator numbers. So that's what I want to do, is make the difference of utilizing drones for tribal members and show them the career opportunities that come with it, because they're using it in agriculture for controlled sprays rather than crop dusting an entire plot of land and damaging and destroying the fertile soil. So, and people are starting to compost and make their own gardens on my reservation, and they're packaging their own stuff and establishing trade. So they're doing good things, and I just want to try and help them. And the Running Strong Foundation has helped with that, providing a grant where I'm able to allow the children to fly a drone. So we did that during the summer, which was cool. Allow them to take pictures, photography, and you can get into photography with these drones. So, and even some of the kids were like, I want to buy my own drone. One of them was talking about becoming a tribal cop. Like, that's awesome ambition. Like, we should do those things. So that's what I've been trying to do with my reservation. Paya, if you want to tell me what you guys have been doing.
Currently, I am aware of, and it's called Woju, a youth program that has been established on Standing Rock, where they assist with the youth. I believe they have programs, fundraising events for them. They help out with giving food out to the youth. They also show some traditional values. Last time I checked, they had an event with hunting animals, where they allowed them to hunt and bring in their fresh catches and showed them how to clean these animals and properly use them for food and material resources.
One question: if I had youth that wanted to do that program, would it be possible to facilitate something like that, to get them to do that? Because a lot of them have never probably even done anything like that. And we have bison on our reservation, and I don't think any of us have dressed or killed our own food before.
I believe so, that they're willing to work out something. I will have to figure out reaching out for them, but I do believe they would be willing to do something.
Brett asked me that, would it be possible to go do that? And I'm like, I know of tribes that practice and do it, and I'd love to ask and see if it'd be possible. And I know a lot of the tribal kids would love to as well.
No, definitely I can figure out a way to reach out to them, and I do believe that they could figure out something.
That would be awesome if you could find out for me. Thank you.
I also want to bring up the ecological. So just a brief ecological, because Corice briefly brought it up, but ecological issues that Standing Rock has gone through, with especially recently as of the no DAPL situation. If you don't know what no DAPL was or is, it is the No Dakota Access Pipeline, oil pipeline that is the oil pipeline that was being constructed on the edge of the Standing Rock reservation line on the riverfront of the Porcupine Creek. The pipeline, when constructed, the pipeline had a major danger. The pipeline showed danger to the people due to that the pipeline itself would leak eventually, as all pipelines do, and it would leak into the Porcupine Creek, which is one of the only water resources for Standing Rock. So during the no DAPL of the 2016 and 2017, the people fought back, but unknown to many people is that on the area outside the reservation, that they had thousands of tons of pesticides and a whole bunch of agriculture chemicals that they used, and they had just sat unprocessed or just sat on this ground that bulldozing crews went through. So when water fighters when the water protectors went out to protect, there's our sacred land and our sacred burial grounds, that many years later, many would actually suffer from repercussions of that chemical compound sitting there on the ground. And I have some relatives, and there is some people with reports of cancer growing in their body.
Yeah, I think that's really good as well. Just to understand that while it's very hard to get people to understand why we need to protect the land, why we need to protect all life, it shouldn't be difficult for people to understand why it's important to not pollute your water, why it's important to not destroy your environment, why it's important to do all these things that we think of as so basic. And yet the way society is currently run is not reflecting that at all. They're not reflecting sustainability. And a big thing that Native American tribes held dear to their hearts, almost all of them, was a deep root in sustainability. You are supposed to create a world that's better than the one you left when you left it for the future generations. We are very much intergenerational people. And the fact that, if we're going briefly back to the boarding schools, they separated and just took away that generation or multiple generations away from their home, away from their way of life, away from who they were. That is really the hardest blow to a culture that is so deeply based in sustainability, in both environmental and in cultural sustainability. That's the worst thing you can do, because what you're saying there is that you're no longer allowed or capable to provide for the next generations. And that really hits a lot of Native American people hard. And it makes, at least I know from my personal experience, from what I've seen, it creates a sense of hopelessness, because how can you possibly make things better if society is not going to listen to you, if you're not allowed to practice what you know is right and what needs to happen? It breaks you down over time. But it's really also important to see that it's not over. We're still fighting, and we're going to keep fighting up until we win, because what we're fighting for is the continuance of all life in a sustainable manner. And that fight, no matter how many times you're knocked down, if it means enough to you, which it does, you're always going to get back up. Because at the end of the day, we're fighting for a sustainable world and a sustainable future for the coming generations. And if that's your goal, if that's what you're fighting for, you're never going to give up. You're never going to stop. Because if you really believe in your heart then it is your duty to help provide for the future coming generations of all life. That is a mission that is so important that you're never going to give up and never going to stop fighting. This isn't just about getting some money or getting a job or just about doing something just because. This is a deep cultural issue and a deep cultural sense of purpose. That's why we all keep going. That's why we all keep fighting, because that's our why. Our why is to help the continuation of all life always. And if that's your mission, you're never going to stop and never give up. And that's really important for all of you out there to hear and to know, which is just because we've had hundreds of years of destruction and attempted cultural assimilation, murder, while it really weighs heavy on us, we're still here and we're still going to try our absolute best to make things right. Is there anything else, Corice or Pea, you guys would like to add to that?
No, I think you hit it right at home. You're right. We are a resilient bunch of people, and we don't give up. We don't quit. We just keep going forward. And you said it.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we'll end on how do you guys, you, Pea and Corice, think that people can help, or they can at least become educated more on this issue? What would you guys suggest they should do?
Don't consider natives as another statistic, because I think one thing that really hit home, what I heard from one of my peers, was that, like, what is there to do on the reservation? Because all I see is alcoholics or homeless people. Don't consider every native to be that, because everybody has their own trauma that they're dealing with, what they have to deal with their past. Don't judge a book by its cover. Obviously, things put them in that place for a reason, and a lot of it is due to what has happened in the past that we talked about. People are just trying to deal with their trauma.
When it comes to what more that everyone could do is, if you know someone that is native, is from a tribe, reach out to them. Maybe just learn a little bit more history from them. Just learn more history from them, what their personal experiences are. And maybe if you're ever around and you have the time, maybe even consider visiting a reservation, maybe with someone that you know. I personally brought a friend of mine to the Standing Rock Reservation, and it very much humbled and educated him very much during his travels with me. And just sharing that, just even the small things, like even just looking up or learning a little bit more about these different cultures and different tribes. There's sometimes it may not be accurate, but as long as you don't mean bad, that you're not doing true harm to anyone, and just maybe, just educate yourselves on like the true American history, because most people don't know the true story about America, about how much destruction that this Western expansion left behind, and the damage it still has to this day.
That was really great.
I agree. I think that was great. And as far as what I would like to add to that, I mean, honestly, you guys hit it home perfectly. I think if you really would like to help, the best way you all can help, I know you all are going to be in many different countries all over the world, and many of you probably might not really make it to America, at least not for a long time. So I think the best thing you guys can do is get educated on some more specific issues. If you find a specific tribe that you think is interesting, do a little bit of digging. Maybe try and reach out to someone on Instagram or Facebook who is of that tribe, and just ask them some questions. Get to know a little bit more about them, a little bit more about their story, and help to spread that story and that message. I really do think it's that simple, which is don't allow the destruction and the evils of what the American construct and colonization has done to us. See us for who we are. Don't see us for who history says we are, which, as we mentioned in this podcast, is we're currently drunks. We can't do anything productive. Don't buy into that illusion. Don't do it. Do a little bit of digging and understand the amazing and beautiful things Native American peoples are doing all over the world. I mean, the Lakota, which is my tribe, we've been all over the world. I have many elders who have spent decades traveling the world, speaking on these issues. Peya has many family members who've been doing the same thing. In fact, Peya's family is actually very famous. If you'd like to do a little bit of digging, Googling on their name, we've been all over. And I think that's where we should end this, which is don't buy into the stereotypes. Keep digging, keep learning, and keep understanding that we are working towards building a sustainable future and a sustainable world, because it is who we are, it's who we've always been, and it's who we're always going to be. So thank you all very much for listening to this podcast. And I'd like to just say a big thank you to Corice and Peya for being here today. And thank you so much for your wisdom and knowledge. And I hope you all have a great and wonderful day.
Thank you, Cruz, for having us too.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for letting us have this opportunity to share.